What happened? There was a huge earthquake centered on the museum. Now the whole building is on fire. You've got to get out of there. Find your way outside. I'm across the street. Now!
Please make your way.
Lie down, my newly married wife, I give you hand. For young and ill accustomed yet to sleeping in a His young wife rose without a word and ran barefoot through the door. He up and followed and then
Shoot it! They're everywhere!
but his young wife was intense, silent,
There's a new problem. Soldiers are looking for us, you in particular, and they're not friendly. Stay alert.
Shoot to kill!
If you come across those soldiers, you probably figured out they're not government. They're LaFay's private security force. He wants us both dead, and I don't know why. I'm heading towards Times Square. Meet me there, and hurry!
Safe from those fire things in here. They don't like water much. You have any idea what's going on? Thought it was some kind of attack at first, but then those monsters showed up. Starting to think maybe it's the end of the world, you know? Feel like I should have gone to church more often. I don't know about you, but I just want to go home if it's still there. Come on, let's get someplace drier.
young white rose without a word and ran there. He up and followed fast and sure, and an angry man was he. But the young wife wasn't there in sight, and only the moon shone through. He followed the tracks through the new deep snow, calling out her name. But only the dingoes in the hills yelled back at him again. And the hair stood off along his neck, and his angry mind was gone. For where the two-footed track gave out, a four-footed track went on. Her nightgown lay upon the snow as it might on a bed sheet, and the tracks that led from where it lay were never of human feet.
Hello everyone, I'm coming directly to you for ask a quick favor. Will you add your name today to join our team? I've said from the outset of this election that we're in a
There is no point in getting dog after dog, sweetheart, if they're all going to run away. If a third dog runs away, I'm going to have to start taking it personally.
Shadow, where are you, boy?
Victoria, can you just stay with me for a second? Can you stay on the line with me? Victoria. There is no point in getting dog after dog, sweetheart, if they're all going to run away. If a
There's an
third
override
dog
switch
runs
in the
away,
warehouse
I'm gonna
foreman's
have to start
office.
taking
You'll
it
have to find a way
personally.
up there to reach the override switch for this door. This door's locked.
Where are you,
Can't
boy?
open it. There's an override switch in the warehouse foreman's office. You'll have to find a way up there to reach the override switch for this door.
Victoria, can you just stay with me for a second?
Hey folks, I'm Joe Biden. I'd like to ask you to join my campaign. As I said,
scratching noise outside of his tent. It grew louder, to the point where he had to look and see what was making this strange noise. When he looked outside of his tent, he saw what he described as he screamed. His cross necklace was exposed, scaring the large wolf away.
Hello, everyone. We've got our big end of quarter deadline coming up at the end of this month.
Heads up, 5 of these stories are animated storybook style. The other one, just an extra 5 stories you can listen to. Because I know how you guys like sets of 10. Even though these illustrations look like a storybook, the stories are allegedly true. They are real experiences told by real people like you. People who claim that they've seen real-life werewolves, dogmen, and lycanthropes. So, enjoy these 10 stories and try your best not to howl at the movie. If you want your story in a future video, send them over to me at darknessprevails.org. Thank you. Is That a Werewolf? By Yona. I live in Delhi, India. A couple of months ago, my best friend Varuna and I were sitting in our room studying for our upcoming finals. With only a couple of weeks left, we were extremely stressed and stayed up for hours that night to prepare. It was our college graduation exams, and we both were pursuing the same subject, living in the same apartment complex and going to the same college. I've known Varuna since we were kids. We met during our kindergarten years, so we were quite close. So it was a long night of preparation, and we were sitting in our living room studying. Our apartment was on the 5th floor, which faces a huge empty plot of land. The only trees present in that land are big coconut trees. The ground is full of tall grasses which cover up the land. There is a huge pond in the middle as well. When we first moved in, that piece of land was seriously spooky, as there were no houses, and there were tons of wild foxes that lived out there. We could hear them barking or screaming every night, which is pretty chilly the first time you hear it. But we both grew used to it. To separate the land from our complex, there's a huge 6-foot wall which prevents the foxes from coming in. From our living room terrace, we could see the foxes running around looking for food. It was around 2:30 a.m., and Varuna and I were chugging coffee and quizzing each other, and the foxes started howling and barking. We didn't pay attention to them, and instead tried to focus. Usually they do this at intervals every night, so it was nothing new. However, this time, they didn't stop barking. Usually they'd stop after maybe a couple of minutes, but they were at it for literally an hour. The complex is new and not many people live here, not to mention the street was pretty far away, so there was no noise from the vehicles or other people. That night, their continuous barking really irked us because we were trying to concentrate. To make matters worse, the stray dogs that lived around our complex began barking back at them. Our complex is full of them because it's still under construction, and they get a lot of food from the workers and a few people that live here. We have 2 Labrador retrievers as well, Danny and Drogo. Yes, named from Game of Thrones. They rushed to the terrace and their back hair was standing up. We didn't pay them much attention at first, but they lied. We walked over to the terrace to bring them back in before they started barking like crazy. I got them on their leashes and tried to control them, afraid they'd take off or jump from the terrace. I got them back inside. Then Varuna and I went back outside. We wanted to know if there was something they were all barking at, to see if it wasn't just some argument between the foxes and dogs. At first, we saw a few foxes running around. And suddenly, we saw a massive figure standing up from the ground. Honestly, I thought it was a person at first. But instead, and it appeared to be holding something in its mouth. Something that I soon realized was the body of a fox. We stood there staring at it without making so much as a whimper. That's when the dogs decided to empty their lungs at this time. The creature turned at us, glaring at us, and I could see it had a long snout, shabby rusty gray hair, and pointed ears. Its eyes held such a malicious gaze and looked almost silvery in color. It looked like it was breathing heavily and growling at the same time. We watched it pull the fox from its mouth with an especially sharp, clawed hand. What on earth are we looking at? Veruna basically screeched beside me, digging her nails into my arms and breaking me out of my shock. The beast turned, got down on the ground, and began running. We could see it going further away as it broke the grass and trampled on it, running at full speed. We were soon left standing there, staring into a now empty field. The dogs had stopped barking and were now nuzzling my leg, trying to get my attention. I noticed their tails had been tucked under their bodies. We went to the rooms and started closing the windows and pulling the curtains back. I've never been so scared in my life. Even though we saw the thing run away, we were sure it was that, especially with all the foxes in that field. We switched off the lights and sat on the sofa, not really speaking for a long time. We could still hear the distant barking and howling of the foxes, but they soon gave up as well. We fell asleep on the couch that night together and woke up quite late. Veruna was still shaken up by the experience and wanted to go investigate, but I didn't want to go out there, daylight or nighttime. What if that thing came back and we were there? We waited for 2 weeks to see if it would come back, but we never saw it again. But I can't be any more thankful for that. I survived the dog by unnamed hunter. The incident occurred in November of 2015, the week before Youth Weekend in Vermont. I went out alone with my hatchet, machete, and water. That's it. I thought myself a self-made survivalist, and I was either too young or too dumb to know any better. I didn't know how truly dangerous the wilderness could be. To set the scene for you, I was alone in 110 acres of woods. I stupidly chose to go to the thickest section. I walked out to an area of spruce trees that had a decent amount of deer activity, and once I got to the location, I got to work making my deer blind using dead falls and spruce boughs. I was making a lot of noise with my hatchet, cutting logs to make the 3 walls to lean the spruce boughs on. That's when I thought I heard a stick snap behind me. I stopped and slowly turned to see what had made the sound. When I turned around, I saw that I was still alone, although I did notice that the woods around me had gone unnaturally quiet.
This isn't what
I was too inexperienced to know that that was a bad sign.
Those creatures were going to be released, or that
I
he'd try
went back
to kill
work,
both of us.
and the same snaps
I
kept
know some people
happening,
who
moving
can help us
around the
stop
side
him.
of me.
Sort of an enemy
That's
of my
when I
enemy
heard a
relationship,
guttural
if you understand my
growl,
meaning.
a snarl. I turned and saw huge dog-like legs with claws or nails that were at least 3 inches long. I looked up, trembling as I took in the sight. Not even 15 feet away from me was the largest dog or wolf-looking thing I'd ever seen. And what really disturbed me was the way it had a human expression upon its face, baring its teeth in a chilling-looking smile.
Why kill us then?
I was dumbfounded. All I could think to do was keep my eyes on it and slowly back away. I did exactly that, and it did the same, mirroring my movement, but coming closer, not backing up like I was. It only stopped when I made it to the edge of the woods.
Damn him.
I do
He
not know
distracted us
why
and
it didn't
sent
follow
troops to
me
finish us
out.
off.
Why it didn't end me when it had the chance? Because it easily could have, at any moment. These days, I don't do my hunting or surviving out in those woods anymore. And if you go out in the woods yourself, I don't recommend you go, unless you go well armed. Werewolf in the Barn by Style H. I lived in South Minnesota on a private property in farm country. The property was rather large and heavily wooded in most parts. There was also a small pond and steep stream bed. It was the beginning of November when I had my encounter with this monster. My wife and I had just finished cleaning up after our yearly Halloween party. We had invited the entire family out and set up a haunted trail that the younger people in the family could enjoy. It was 2 days after the party had happened. It was about 8:50 p.m. We had finally finished storing all the decorations, and we also moved our 5 horses up to the main barn from their walkout pasture. We had put them down there so we could use the main pasture for the trail. The horses did not make it very easy. They bolted as soon as we opened their gate. This wasn't usually like them. We basically had to run the mile uphill to catch up. We set out fresh hay and locked them in, since there was going to be a hard freeze that night. I had just put dinner in and was enjoying some television when my phone got a text message in the kitchen. I lazily got to my feet when I heard the horses going crazy in the barn. I figured one of the farm dogs had gotten locked in with them. They do prefer to sleep on the hay instead of our carpet. I grabbed my spotlight and I walked out to the porch. Surprisingly, I found all my dogs there, all of them staring at the barn. I shined the light down into the lockout pasture and saw the horses all on one side of the corral. They were also staring at the open barn door. At that point, I was still assuming they had gotten spooked by something small, maybe a bat flying around or a tool falling off the wall. I yelled back to my wife, who was upstairs. "Something spooked the horses. I'm gonna go round them up. Can you help out?" It took her a minute to reply, saying that she'd be out in a few. I called for the dogs to come with me and started for the barn.
This post were called away a little while ago.
I walked into the barn pasture, and the horses immediately trotted to crowd around me, almost pushing me over. I yelled and they backed off, giving me some space. My wife's mare, Cherry, kept rubbing her muzzle against me, eyes wide and terrified. I grabbed a nearby stool and brush and began to pat her backside, which is something she enjoyed, and I was trying to calm her down real quick. And that's when I noticed the 4 long parallel slashes going down her leg. I immediately thought there was a bear, and I shone the light into the barn. Besides a few tools and some buckets thrown around, there was nothing. I figured if there was a bear, it had smelled some of the garbage left in the upper level from the party. I was about to start to lock the horses back up when I noticed a bale of hay lying on the floor, twine still on it. It was not there when I locked them up.
You set us up to open the box.
I went rigid and shone my light up to the loft, expecting to see a black bear, but I could only see the first couple of feet of the loft, so I had to climb up. I walked over to the ladder and noticed some dark gray hair hanging on a nail about halfway up. Right before I was about to climb up, I heard my wife behind me start to scream, along with the horses whinnying. I spun around to see her shining her own light upward to the top of the barn. "The window," she said. Drawing my courage, I climbed up the ladder. I looked toward the window. It wasn't that long. At first I thought it was one of my younger relatives pulling a prank on me. But when the creature opened its mouth and started to pant like a dog, I knew that it was no prank. It was about 6 feet tall and at least 200 pounds, halfway through the window of the barn wall. It was dark gray with a lighter shade around its neck. Its head was very similar to a German shepherd, but with a much larger muzzle. Its eyes, the closest I can describe them to color, would be beard, like someone was showing a bony yellow light through it. Those eyes were locked on me, mouth still open, revealing sharp and jagged teeth, stained light brown. It was almost leaning out of the window, one hand resting on the side. Its hands resembled almost a raccoon's hands, with long, bony fingers and sharp claws. I slowly climbed back down the hall, and I made my way to my wife. There we could still see this thing, down on the other side of the window, staring out. My wife was about to scream again, but I shot my hand back and covered her mouth. She immediately grabbed my arm and clung to me. The creature put both hands in the window, while I leaned down and whispered to my wife. On 3, we run and we don't look back. Before I could finish the sentence, the creature had jumped down and went to all fours, growling, and we simply bolted. We ran the 25-yard gap between the house and barn in record time. The dogs had all run back to the deck and were now growling and baring their teeth at the thing. My wife reached the door first and flung it open, but when she turned to me, she screamed. I risked it, glancing back behind me, and saw that the thing was terribly close, less than 10 feet. I reached the front steps and jumped as hard and as far as I could, and thankfully landed inside with the dogs right behind me. My wife slammed the door and was then thrown back as the door was flung back open, the thing standing up and staring down at us, baring its teeth. It wasn't all the way in, though. I jumped up and placed all my weight into the barely open door. It shut and latched, but I soon felt something heavy outside slamming its weight against the door, and I heard the wood begin to crack. My wife thankfully had recovered and rushed to my side to set the lock in place. We then left the entryway, locking every door we saw, and ran into our kitchen. The only window there was a small one above the sink, which we hid under, hopefully out of sight of the thing. We huddled there for 3 hours, waiting and listening. Each of our dogs were set in different entryways and other rooms, all observant and waiting as well. We heard each one growling, one after the other, as if something was outside the house, walking around. Not too long after that, we heard the horses whining, followed by a loud crash. I figured they had broke down the gate and had escaped back into the pasture. We felt relieved until one of the dogs bared its teeth a moment later, and the assault on our house continued. Eventually, around midnight, when things settled down, the dogs no longer bared their teeth. We went to the bedroom, shut all the curtains, and locked the doors. We tried to sleep, but every little sound outside made me jump, and my wife was worried about our horses. Just when the sun began to rise, we managed to fall asleep. When we woke up, we immediately got dressed and went to check on the horses. They were all fine, scared but fine. We patched up Cherry, my wife's mare, with her deep gashed cuts. We went over to the barn door to see what needed fixing. But what we saw surprised us. The latch to the barn door had been undone and flipped up, the way a person would open it. No animal could do that. I realized this thing must have been quite intelligent, which made it all the more horrifying. That day we went to the town, and a bed bed. We went to a sporting goods store and after that we didn't have any more dogs. The horses refusing to leave the barn a few weeks later. I asked many of our neighbors if anything strange had happened on their properties. No one had any dogs, except for one. The one was a few miles south of our property. When I asked what happened, all he told me was that they lost a stallion a few weeks prior to my encounter. I asked him if he saw anything, and he gave me a funny look. He said it looked like a bear got at it real bad, tore up his stallion real good. I wondered if he was hiding something, hiding a story that he thought others wouldn't believe. But I didn't push the subject any further. Since then, I can't look at the woods the same way anymore. If these things are out there, who knows what else is? I don't feel safe going fishing, camping, or even horseback riding anymore. But I will say this to you. If you're outside at night, always watch your back. Dogman by Henry. I was at a bus stop waiting for the bus to get here. It was very dark outside, and there was no light. So I had turned on my phone flashlight, hoping I wouldn't be passed up by the bus. I waited a good 10 minutes before I saw it. I began waving my light in the direction of the driver, hoping they would see me, but they did not, and I ended up getting passed by. Knowing that my house was about a mile or two down the road, I started to run down the road, and as I was running, I heard something that made me pause only for a moment. A screaming howl. Not like any wolf or dog I'd ever heard. It was terribly close to me. My heart started beating faster than it ever had before, and I was running with tears coming down my face, but I had no intention of stopping. The road I was running down was lined with thick trees on each side. My panicking anxiety made it seem like the trees were closing in on me, but I knew they weren't, and I tried to remain calm. The screaming howl came again, and it was getting closer. I wasn't sure if I was running from it, or if I was being chased by something. Once I had reached the house, it looked like nobody was home. My parents do not keep the front door unlocked, so I had to run around to the back, but I could not get into that door either. My heart was pounding. All I could do was wait, and prayed that the howling would stop. Soon, I heard my parents arrive home, and I ran to the front door. I found them in the living room. They brought home some food, and they had started eating. I interrupted them, explained the noise that I had heard, and I was wondering if they'd seen anything on their way here. They both looked at me confused. My dad said they hadn't seen anything, but I was welcome to check the front yard. I was standing on the front porch, too anxious to eat. I was scared, but also extremely curious. Whatever was out there, whatever I had heard, I wanted to see it. It was like I couldn't feel better about the situation unless I did see the thing. And as I stood there waiting for any movement in the dark, I saw what appeared to be a person walking toward our house. But as it got closer, I saw how far from human it was. It had very long, tall, thick legs, extremely long, sinewy arms that hung down on its knees. Its shoulders were hunched over, and the closer it got, the faster its speed picked up. When it was all too close, I turned and ran inside. I sat down quickly by my mom, getting close to her side. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was panicking so much. As she was trying to comfort me, we began to hear scratching near the walls of the house, like it was coming from the back end. When I stood up to look out the window behind my dad, I saw two of the same figures walking around the house. My family went quiet for a while, until the scratching went away, and I could no longer see the silhouettes walking around outside. I remember my dad saying, Did you see how big those were? To this day, he believes that they were just dogs rather than bears. I'd seen one up close, and I'd have to disagree with that. My family is planning on moving into a more secluded area near a lake, and I can't help but feel a bit nervous about living even deeper in the wilderness. The Summer Monster by Jared. I lived in mid-Michigan, not the ghettos part, although I do live very close to a few hotspots. No, I live in a more rural part of Michigan. It's flat farmland with large patches of forest, where the DNR is constantly receiving stories of weird animals. The latest is an out-of-place big cat, or cats, I should say, jaguars and tigers. But that's not what I'm here to talk about, even though I wish it was. It began around the mid-90s. It was a warm summer when I began to see something stalking the roads and forests. My first encounter was in 5th grade. Before then, I was always really sick as a kid, so I was never outside too often. As I got older and stronger, I began faring much easier with the outside world. My parents planted tons of feral cats, close to a dozen of them. Of course, they all had kittens for each. At the time, I had a big Barney, who has sadly since passed away. Barney absolutely loved cuddling the kittens regardless of their age, meaning the kittens would go into shock being stolen from their mom by this giant ball of love. We'd have to go outside and take the kittens from the poor dog,